big time Dodger fan and Rams fan. I'm with Steve Kramer. He's a U.S. missionary, our missionary for 16, 17 years now, right, Steve?
Yeah. You're making me feel old.
You are a single man, no Julie. Best thing to happen to you besides Jesus, right?
Once I met you guys, the anointing came into my life, and I was fruitful from there on. So.
That's awesome, man. So big time Dodgers fan, congratulations.
Thank you.
I had the raise with this. So you and my daughter, Lindsay, Lindsay's a huge Seager fan, both Seagers, but mostly Corey. She thinks he's the bomb, man.
Yeah. Well, it's been 32 years. I was 15 the last time they won the World Series, so I was definitely kind of relieved when you wait decades for your team, and they've come so close. And it's awesome. But what a crazy year, needless to say.
Hey, as a Mariner fan, I wouldn't know how that feels. I haven't waited 32. I've waited since the inception. Man, 76. I get that. So, Steve, we're doing a series right now, a series on serving. What we are created for. And so we've been looking at from the very beginning, in week 1 is, in order to know what you're created for, you have to know the Creator. He's the one that purposely and intentionally made us. He created us on purpose. God knew what he was doing for a purpose. And then week 2, we looked at what does it look like to be equipped, living out of your spiritual gifts, fruit of the Spirit, God using your skill sets, those kind of things. And then the following week, last week, we looked at the attitude of serve, having that Jesus attitude. It's almost as if in the spiritual realm, we're walking around with the towel, as Jesus did at washing feet. And then this week, that it's pertinent to what you and I are talking about today. And you really came to mind, Steve, when I was looking at this, and that is God elevating us to serve, God looking at our life. You weren't born right away working into City Serve. You had kind of a circuitous this route, kind of like Moses, but not like you struck the rock or anything, or weren't allowed to the promised land. That's not prophetic, man. But you look at it, and you have taken an interesting route. You went to the U of O. You were you're going into broadcasting, journalism. You were a DJ while you're there. That was kind of cool. Is it true? Was that country music, man?
That was actually that was when I was a senior in high school. So I was I still like some of the classic country.
You got friends in low places?
That's it right there. The Garth Brooks era. That was it.
Yeah, so you went, you got out of college, U of O, and then you were in broadcasting, news broadcasting, and all different things. And so looking at your life, and you end up in the Netherlands, in doing missions for many years. You come back, then you go to U of O, Chi Alpha, and then now you're at City Serve, serving the vulnerable. Give us a little idea of, man, how did that happen? And what were some of those junctures in your life where, those things happened? What did that look like for you when you made some of those changes?
Yeah, thank you, Pastor. I think to start with my ministry, it always got to start at the beginning. I was born 3 pounds, 2.5 months premature. Doctors told my parents that if I lived, I would never walk. And my journey is, what you described, it's like, man, I feel like somebody who's lived 5 different lives, but it's all been for a purpose. And there's been kind of this thread of certainly God's faithfulness through it. When I was 12 years old, I was in a wheelchair. I was at Northwest College. My dad had been called to ministry, and I joined him for a chapel, and a guy by the name of Rich Wilkerson was speaking. Wow. And he said, if God were to call you anywhere in the world, would you go? And I just remember being so overwhelmed with the goodness of God, with gratitude, that I shall go anywhere. And God spoke to me at that moment and said, go to the Netherlands. Now, you have to remember, I couldn't walk from here to the nearest wall, but God spoke to me, go to the Netherlands. And I thought, like many missionaries, when you go to overseas, that's going to be where you go for the rest of your life. And that was our plan. I mean, our kids even have Dutch names. We were planning, this. And so a lot of my journeys even surprised me, but I think that for each one of us, certainly when we talk about service, I was thinking about this whole idea of service last night, and I asked my wife, because she's the most servant-minded person I've ever met in my life. By far, it's not even close. I mean, she's married to a disabled guy, so she helps me with everything. She mows the lawn. She always carried our kids when they were little babies. I mean, she just does so much. And the funny thing about people who are service-minded, they're not really conscious that they're service-minded. She just said, "I like to make people happy." That was her response. Didn't sound super theological.
That's true. Gotta love her, man.
Yeah, she just, that, and I think the thing is, whenever I personally have, and I want to get ahead of myself here, but whenever I've thought about being servant-minded, it's usually in the context of I feel like I've done something for somebody and they haven't paid me back, So servant-minded people aren't really conscious of the fact that they're servant-minded. They're just servant-minded. So getting back to my journey, it's always just been a response to what God was saying in my life. And I got to be honest with you. I mean, every single time I've moved in ministry, I didn't want to do it. I mean, I remember in the Netherlands getting an email from the previous directors, and they said, "Hey, we feel like God might be, speaking to you to come here and take over and re-pioneer." And I said, no thanks. I'll pray about it, like we typically do. And so my journey has just been kind of responding to what God's saying now, because I love to stay places a long time, build deep relationships and things. I think too, also gifting comes into this. We're definitely pioneers. We're definitely people that love to see light fires. And what's happened is you get something built and established, and then God just kind of says it's time to move on, and you don't, my point is, you don't always want to move on because you like being where you're at. And so, that journey has just been crazy. I also believe this, Pastor, that so many times, we can over spiritualize things. And I think God really uses our passion. So for me, I love music. And so I became a DJ, and I saw God use me in that. I remember interviewing Ken Griffey Jr. and Randy Johnson in the Mariners locker room. And God was there too, and I would share Christ there. So, I would also encourage people, I think we can talk about we almost can make it harder than it is. Sometimes it's just living life full of passion, love for God, and being obedient to what he asks us to do. And so every step of the way, I've truly, really enjoyed and felt fulfilled in what we're doing. Whether it was being a country music disc jockey or planting a church in the red light district of the Netherlands. That's
fantastic. And part of that journey, as you've talked about, I love that. You said, it's like I've lived 5 lives. Living and being obedient where you're at, growing where you're at, serving where you're at, allowing God to shape you. In those 5 lives, you must have had some incredible leaders that were part of that. Even the pastor where you're at now. The church you're serving, and you're part of that body now, that gathering. Tell us about a leader that stood out to you, that modeled that heart of servant leadership, that was really transformational for you, that was helpful for you, maybe even spoke some difficult things to you. Who would that be? And I know there's probably several, but who stands out?
Great question. And you're certainly right about the pastor we work with now. But the one that I was thinking of, and I think it's kind of funny to say this, but my dad responded to the call to ministry. He was a railroader, and in his 30s, packed up 4 kids from Bakersfield, California, moved to the Northwest, went to Bible college, and then he went on to pastor in Orofino, Idaho, Toledo, Oregon, where I graduated from high school, and then Scio, Oregon. If you know where Scio is.
Scio, yeah.
And and I remember coming home from college and seeing my dad. He pastored this small church. He'd be mowing the lawn, and he kind of did. When you pastor a small church, you're kind of a jack of all trades.
Right.
I remember one particular time though, and this kind of summarizes how I think of him as a servant leader. We had major flood in Scio. The Thomas Creek there was flooding, and the whole downtown literally was a couple feet of water. And so I got home from college, and he goes, "Hey, we need to get in the church van and go rescue this lady and her cat." Her name was Norma, and she had this cat that she loved. And I'm not making this up. We get down to her house, and the flood was really bad. The church van literally started floating. It started floating, down the street, and we have this elderly lady with her cat. And I'm looking at my dad and I'm like thinking, as kind of a selfish college student, like, you're not getting paid enough to do this. Like, what is motivating this guy to do this? And I just saw it all the time. I mean, I just saw the late night counseling sessions, the times that people were really critical of him, and he continued to love them and serve them. And that always really made a profound impact on me, is just seeing that example. And I think that's not, oh man, it's not something you see every day. It's really not to have. And again, though, if you were to ask him, he'd probably go, "What are you talking about? I was just responding to God." And I think,
right.
I think true service to God is just like it talks about in Romans 12. That in view of God's mercy, it's a reasonable response. And I remember lying in a hospital bed at 5 years old in Shriners Hospital, San Francisco. I remember lying on the floor in a body cast for months at a time after surgery. And I've never once felt like, oh man, I got to serve God. I got to go overseas. Oh, I got to leave TV or whatever. No, God has been so good to me. And I think that's where service has to start is a response to God out of love.
That grace that you receive in that gratitude, Steve?
What'd you say?
Is that the grace you're responding out of, God's grace and goodness to you with gratitude?
Yeah, I remember thinking, it's interesting you say that. I remember at 12 years old when God called me to the Netherlands, and I just remember thinking, like, God, it just was so logical to me. God has been so good to me. He's been so good to me. How could I not spend the rest of my life doing whatever he asked of me? And I want to go. I want to be, and I'll tell you what, in our current ministry as missionaries to the vulnerable, just last week, I had a chance to meet with a 12-year-old boy with cerebral palsy, and his family's in the military. So we go down to meet him for the first time. And I'll tell you what, there's no greater joy than to, I don't know, just let the love of God spill out, because he's been so good to you. It just spills out, and it just floods, and to see his tears in his eyes, and I had tears in my eyes, and those things are happening all the time, and it's because of God's love for us that we respond to his love. I think it's really that simple. I mean, I saw my dad just so full of love for God and what God had done in his life that it spilled over to, a lady with a cat caught in a flood, and so whenever I get to, like I said earlier, whenever I get to the point of kind of feeling sorry for myself, like, man, I'm working so hard and nobody appreciates it. You have days like this, right?
Oh yeah.
That's always coming from the wrong place. Service always needs to be fueled by love and gratitude. I mean, that's the starting point. And so I have a little book here. I hadn't planned on this, but I just saw it out of the corner of my eye. But I have a book we call it The Book of Miracles. Whenever God does something great in our life, faithful answers prayer, we write it down here. So I literally have 15 years of answers to prayer. And some days I got to be honest, even as a missionary, I'm not feeling it. I'm just not feeling it. And I take this out and I begin to look at what God's done for me, and automatically I get the compelling to go out to others. I mean, it's that simple.
So you've chronicled the goodness of God in your life.
Yeah.
That's fantastic as that reminder. Steve, there's a lot of folks, as we start to wrap this up, there's a lot of folks now that are in really low places. We certainly have people that life hasn't changed all that much for them. And then you have others that are pretty low right now. And when we talk about serving others, they're, like, as you said, sometimes you're just trying to keep your own head above water, let alone how can I help somebody else? But the simplicity of what your dad did, and I think sometimes we miss that simplicity, that we want to make it this, and sometimes it's just that reaching out. Even in our moment of difficulty, what would you say to folks? What would you say to folks right now that are just going, man, I need God to just touch my life because I'm at a low point.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly something that I think we all can relate to in 2020 with this pandemic and everything going on, and even having this conversation with our kids who, don't understand why they can't go to school, why they don't have any friends now, you know. And so it affects all of us, no matter
Yeah.
our age. And, you know, I think that I'm trying to put it into words to make it sound more eloquent, but really, we have a kind of a saying in our family: when things get stressful, you got to throw some things out of the boat, you know. And I've had this mental image of just like being loaded down with like so much baggage. You got to toss what's not essential, right? So first thing I'd say is just hold on, you know, don't give up. You know, really have to focus sometimes on just breathing, you know, on just breathing and saying, I'm going to get through the next hour. I'm going to get through this phone call or this email that's bringing me bad news. But I think it's really a lot more. I think that we can, again, overcomplicate things. I remember my dad, when I got called, when I got ordained and commissioned to the Netherlands, he said, I have a word for the Lord from you. And I was expecting some prophetic word. I wasn't married at the time. I thought maybe he would tell me the name of my future wife, you know, something really profound. But he said this, and I'll never forget. He said, you know, Steve, just keep saying yes to Jesus. Just keep saying yes to Jesus, you know. And that's stuck with me, even on the toughest days. And I'll be honest with you, there are days when we're in the Netherlands, days when we're down in Eugene, days that we're here where it's really hard and you want to go back to being a country music disc jockey and just kind of escape or move to Montana or something, you know, just
right.
And so I think if you can just kind of, like I talked about, unload that baggage, simplify things to only the essentials, you know, your love for God, your love for your family, and then start building out from there and just say, what's the next thing that Jesus is asking me to say yes to? And then doing that. And I'll tell you what, and this is no exaggeration, even though I have a daily disability that has challenges, obviously, I truly feel like the most blessed man that's ever lived. Right. But that has only happened because I tried, by the grace of God, to say yes to Jesus and respond to him. You know, moving to Bakersfield for us was, Lord, what are you doing? We got this great ministry. We can go see the Ducks whenever we want, you know. Grandparents live down the street. We're moving to a place that's hot. You know, who wants to move to Bakersfield? Let's be honest. You know, nobody looks to move to Bakersfield. You know, it's just got
the onion fields. Yeah.
But as we're here now, and it took me a while to see it. Not to mention the fact, and I'm being really vulnerable today, but it was really hard for me to embrace this call of I'm going to go minister. This might sound funny to some people, but I'm actually going to highlight my weakness every time I talk. Every time I speak, every time I step out in ministry, I'm going to talk about my cerebral palsy, the challenges of my life. And that made me really vulnerable. And I didn't really want to do it. But I just had to keep saying yes to Jesus. Now that we've done that, oh man, such an abundance of blessings, you know, and so we walk by faith, not by sight, you know, and we just keep saying yes to Jesus. And, that's not to minimize what people are going through. You know, we're also working with those that have mental health issues, and man, that's been compounded like by 400% or something like that in this time. You know, so, but if you can just unload the boat, focus on the essentials, and keep saying yes to Jesus, you'll be blessed more than you could ever ask or imagine.
You know, and it is that feeling of being stuck. Have you ever felt that yourself? When you felt like you were, you know, we're talking about elevated, you know, elevated to serve. Was there a time you felt stuck like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's whenever I found, for me personally, I think almost without exception, it's when I have lost sense of the presence of God, when I've not made that my focus, and I've made maybe ministry output or what I'm doing the focus or something else, or quite honestly, sometimes you just get kind of lazy in your mind and you just think, oh, I want to take the day off and you know, but whenever I've been in the presence of God, immediately you feel like, man, I'm unstuck. And so I think that's what you have to get in the presence of God. To me, you know, obedience has a reward. We know from the word that when we obey God, there's blessings. But to me, there is nothing like being in the presence of Jesus. I mean, I long for that, you know, even as I'm saying it now, I long for that. And there are seasons of being stuck when usually I get my eyes on my circumstances, when I feel too busy to spend time with the Lord. But when I get back in the presence of the Lord, I mean, immediately you start to get a perspective and you start to see everything, even a lifelong disability, and I've said this before, people will rebuke me sometimes. You know, I don't think they understand, but I sometimes will say that cerebral palsy, it didn't come from the Lord, but it has been one of my greatest blessings. Because without that, I wouldn't have never known the unconditional love of a wife or my kids, or, you know, or have the ministry that we have. And only being in the presence of the Lord can help you see with that perspective. Does that make sense? You know,
Yeah, and it kind of helps if you need to unload the boat. Being in his presence kind of helps you see those things that you need to toss overboard.
Yeah. It always starts with perspective. You know, you think about even when we were in the Netherlands, one of our heroes was Corrie ten Boom, a woman who went through World War II. Yeah. Her parents were killed, her sister was killed. And yet it would be hard to find a woman that had such a beautiful perspective. And I think perspective is everything. You know, how we can see a day, you know, it totally depends on if we spent time with the Lord. And so anybody who's feeling stuck, and I am preaching to myself, if I feel stuck, I have to get in the presence of God. It's usually not even that long of a time in his presence, and I'm like, what was my problem? You know?
Yeah. That's fantastic. Well, Steve, I'm so grateful that you took the time today. Yeah. You know, is there any final words you want to say to the folks at FJ at Faith Journey this morning?
Well, I mean, I think that it's just such a joy. I want to say thank you. It is such a joy for 17 years, almost 17 years now, to partner with you guys, and especially as we've had, you know, some major transitions, you know, and you guys have really valued us as a family. I think you know there are people in churches that can value missions, but to value missionaries and truly feel like friends. You know, we talked for 30 minutes before, and I was having such a good time. You know, and I think that's really the joy of partnership. And I also want to say too that, you know, I haven't talked much about our ministry, and I won't hear much about it, but we're seeing God give a voice to the voiceless, and local churches across this country are rising up to meet the need of their neighbor and the one that feels excluded. You know, and I've been preaching a message that everyone's invited to the King's table. You know, if you know the story of Mephibosheth, here's a guy with 2 lame feet, and King David said, "You're invited to my table." And I'll say without Faith Journey partnering with us, sending us, you know, those invitations would be harder to get out. You know, so you guys are having an impact around the world. We just started the first special needs ministry in the history of Denmark through a local church, international church in Denmark. So you literally have hundreds and thousands of people now that can come to church, hear the gospel that never could before in the history of the country. Yeah. You know, it's phenomenal. And so thank you guys. And we're going to be up in July. We come up for a month. And so we'd love to stop in and see you guys as well.
We'd love to have you hang with us. Thanks again, Steve Kramer. Appreciate you. Tell Julie and Case and say hi for us, all right?
Sure will.
God bless, buddy. Bye.